Well, this is Byrne for Georgian Crossroads. No, it isn't. This is... Little girl wants to come up here and I just chased her away.
We're going to devote our energies to sports and gardening, all the cultural pursuits as far as they're concerned. In fact, we're going to put the goons to sleep. Meanwhile, we dig.
Well, this is Byrne for the Anadromous, and this is going to be an experiment in the Anadromous life. I thought I've been playing for you various lectures and ideas about the nature of reality, and I thought what we would do today is something more practical, that we would take a walk. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take a drive in a bus up to an amusement park, Mtatsminda Park. Then we're going to walk down the mountain to my house. But I'm not taking you all the way home. But we're going to have a walk down the mountain, and we're going to just simply keep our eyes open and look to see what we can see in the world around us. And this is really an experiment in how to explore reality. Call it baby steps in exploring reality. Come along. So I waited down at Rustaveli Square for the number 124 bus, which only cost half a lari, about 15 cents in American money. And it took me about 1,000 feet up in elevation, or 300 meters. I passed through the small town of Okrakana. It's about a 20-minute ride. And this is the beginning of this little journey and experiment into investigating reality. I have no particular plan. I set out with no particular plan. I know vaguely, obviously where I'm going, but I'm not sure at all what I'm going to say. I often get a lot out of traveling, and I thought maybe I can share how I look at things with you. And as we near the gates of Mtatsminda Park, the traffic and the parking situation gets bizarre. Mtatsminda Park is a run-down Soviet-era amusement park. There are mythological themes. Notice people are not wearing masks. It's almost magical. The minute you enter the park, you don't need a mask anymore, which I think is funny. Of course, I didn't wear a mask either because I'm not going to get close enough to anyone to worry about it. And people in Georgia are pretty much done with the pandemic, but we're not going to talk about that. We're here to talk about the things you can see. We're not here to talk about history. So look at this strange figure up on the top of the entrance of Mtatsminda Park. It's actually a animated figure, a stop-motion puppet animation figure made by the great Carlo Sulakauri, and the name of the figure is Bambora. He's kind of a strange, childlike, demon, but really this mountain creature called a dev. And Georgia has a lot about them. They're both frightening and comical at the same time. Very interesting. we start looking at this kind of Soviet-era googie architecture, which is filled with imitation cracks, but also real cracks. That is, these things are old and falling apart. And, of course, there's the blue of the water. Interesting that in many of these amusement parks, the water is always this color blue. I think it's that way for two reasons. One, safety. You can see things in the water when it's that kind of blue, so if a child or some object falls into the water, you can get it. Two, that turquoise blue represents a kind of heaven. A heaven in the water. And of course the water itself is really important. It was a very hot day when I was up there. Hot, about 5:30 in the evening. And there are several places where there are waterfalls in this amusement park. And this is not a small feature. The presence of water is there. It's to give you something that you innately feel is good. This dripping, flowing waterfall kind of effect. Now, interestingly, I heard these boys coming, and they started climbing kind of over. Now, in a way, this is designed to be climbed on, but you can tell in a moment they're going to be climbing where they shouldn't be climbing. And again, if you look carefully at my footage, you will see that some of these cracks are not simply design cracks, but rather they are cracks in the actual architecture that's falling apart, and I'm sure there's some sort of chicken wire frame holding it all together. And what are they doing? They're teasing each other, they're pushing each other. This is very important for what, I guess the question I'm starting to ask is, what is an amusement park? Why do people come to amusement parks? They come for some very specific reasons. Reasons they're not fully conscious of. They don't necessarily say to themselves. Now here we are with more of this bad googie architecture, and we're inside, we're still in this opening structure, which I find fascinating. Notice these spiderweb-like designs that are made out of kind of wrought iron. You look up and there's a hole above you. I guess rain would just come in. I don't think there's a glass over that at all. But this imitation, evidently, this is suggestive of some kind of mythological world, which is not a world we're necessarily familiar with in the West. But as we look around and we stop, we look at the trees here, these imitation trees, and what is it? They're covered with graffiti. And a lot of it is a very specific kind of graffiti. And even though the Georgian alphabet is impossible for non-Georgians to read, a lot of this is in the Latin alphabet, or even English. Some of it's in Cyrillic, Russian. Occasionally you will see the Georgian alphabet. I'll point some out if we see some here. But for me it's fascinating that people will come and write things, particularly those Anna loves Anna plus Georgi kind of things. This Ani plus Soso's a man's name, boy's name. That they're writing these things to I heart so and so. You know, it used to be that people would carve their initials into trees. That was a much longer lasting pledge. If you carve your initials into trees, you're expecting that to always be there. If you just use, felt marker, Isa and Manu, there's some Georgian script there for you. If you're only using markers, well, this will be painted over. Nevertheless, there's some strange need we have, especially, I'm sure most of these people were in their young to mid-teens. You don't find 40-year-old people generally going there, it's like, yeah, I just went on Tinder and I put my name on this. No. You don't find them graffitiing in the same way, and it would have to be highly unusual. Now, we're looking at a water coaster here. Water coaster, of course, being kind of a halfway between a water slide and a roller coaster. So you have a little boat or cart, and then you have an area where you're basically free falling. You're not on any actual tracks anymore, down into a pond. Now this is actually, I think there was a guy laying down in that, but the point is that right now we're looking at some empty ones. But I started watching this, and this is when I started thinking to myself, like I said, I didn't come here with any specific thoughts about what I would say. But what I decided to do is to just start looking at things and seeing what suggests themselves to me. Now, of course, believe me, this is not the first time I've ever thought about an amusement park, or a traveling carnival, or a fun fair, or all the different words we have for these things. But now watch this. Now, there was a guy in that. Now, of course, he didn't scream. And of course, part of the reason to come here is for a young man brings his girlfriend or a girl he's interested in, or his wife, and she screams. But what does he do? He either acts the man who doesn't scream, or he protects her. Very similar to what happens in a horror film. And this is like a rite of passage to come to this kind of a ride. Now, the more you think about it, the more you realize that all amusement parks are like this. And that these rides that make us scream and laugh are not simply about having fun. Now, this is often the word that is most often used. We're just having fun. We're going, and it is fun. I've had a lot of fun at amusement parks. But that's not the main point. Now, we're going to watch these people on top, and there will also be another one coming around on the bottom rung around the same time. Listen to them. Of course, there is the splashing of the water for an extra little buzz. But listen now. We're in a different part. You can hear the carts being towed up. We're actually on a hill overlooking the actual tracks, which are towing people up. Turns out they're really some sort of rubber roller that the boats are going on. But that sound, that creaky, clanky metal sound, is part of the experience as well. And on a good roller coaster, that creaky, clanky sound is the sound of nightmares. I'll tell you a little bit about one of those a little later. But it's important somehow to have these sounds. So the sounds can be the just that feeling of, they design these in, these are not accidents, these sounds. They could make them. In fact, Disneyland tends to make roller coasters and such as silent as possible, so you get the feeling like you're flying, like you're in a spaceship or something. And here, I like this. This little kid's looking down, and he's basically saying, could I do this? So he's testing himself. And then there are two younger boys up there, and they're about to come down. And again, it's a test. Okay, they're coming around, and now they're going to go down. And this little boy keeps watching. This is important for him. And there you have it. You've challenged death and won. Of course, that's what it is. Speaking of challenging death, most amusement parks also have a horror ride or a haunted house or some sort of truly dark spectacle. This one is a little mini roller coaster in a dark, forbidding world. And these girls are laughing because they've just survived it. They've actually been a little bit frightened, you can tell. But what is the point of an amusement park? It isn't really about fun. It's about death. It is about confronting death in a safe place, like a horror film. So here's Tutankhamun's labyrinth. Now, what it really is a house of mirrors, and I must tell you, I've been in this one a couple of times. It took me a good 20 minutes to figure out how to get out once I got in. It's actually quite well done. But the house of mirrors is a strange thing. So then look at these figures. They have the Egyptian death figures. They have the little cherub that is often accompanying tombstones. Find that figure in graves. Again, so much of what happens in an amusement park. This one has this mythological overtone, like there's this strange rock tree type face. And I don't know what it refers to, but I think it's could be something out of Georgian mythology. Now, what's interesting is some of the voices you often hear most here are Russians. The Russians come to Georgia, to this old Soviet era theme park, and they love it. Now you see here Georgians here quite a bit as well, of course. Almost no English. Because Americans, when they travel, they're often too cool for this sort of thing. By the way, you find these wax museums is something I don't want to talk about it now. It's an entirely different order of experience. It has to do with things like puppets and other homunculi and strange humanoid mirrors and representations. Want a room with laughter? Let's get in a little closer on this box. What's going on in here? I love this box. This is a work of art. And there I am looking at myself through mirrors, but there's all this weird miniature stuff. And to me, this is more interesting than what's inside. The suggestion of the world being trapped inside a box. Almost got run over by the kids there. Besides, of course, there are often nostalgic elements to these things as well. Food, of course, but nostalgic elements, buildings and such in theme parks. A lot of this is for the older people. The younger kids don't care about Main Street USA in Disneyland. They don't care about imitation alpine chalets. They don't care about this sort of thing. But that's because somebody's got to bring the kids and the younger people here, because it's the younger people who really want to go on the rides. So we're about to go into this square area. There's some food stalls and things like that. I was kind of hungry and a little bit thirsty, and I just couldn't find anything that I wanted. They had a banana shake, and that kind of thrilled me. Unfortunately, I said, banana milkshake, and she said, Ara, no, don't have any. But this struck me as interesting. Here we are in the middle of all this death-oriented imagery, and what do we find? It's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, surrounded by this fountain of living water. Very interesting. Now, what's really fascinating is the effect of the light upon this. We're going to get a little closer on the tree in a minute. But look at what the light does. And just think about the light for a moment. The sun is getting lower in the distance. And it's almost like the tree is weeping. And there's an owl, which represents wisdom, and a squirrel, which represents thrift, putting things aside. But then again, the tree stands in this very symbolic fountain. And when you go back up and look at the tree again, is that Minerva's owl? Whatever it is, the owl is wisdom. But if we look a little bit further, what do we find? The apple. And it is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It represents death. It's not the tree of life. Fascinating. Now look at the light coming through here again. And light is going to become very important as we continue with our trip. But let's think about death a little more. There are machines here whose only purpose seems to be to let you simulate the effect of death. And we're going to be on one in just a moment. And this machine takes you up and drops you. Russian girls are up there. And here's the torture of this machine. It's going to drop you with extreme speed to let you feel the effect of falling to your death. But it's all about the tension of how long it's going to take before it drops you. And strangely, these girls now feel more alive for having braved death. Well, of course, there is one machine that pretty much every good amusement park or carnival has. And it is the machine that is a rehearsal for death more than any other. And it is the roller coaster. Now, this one wasn't working today, unfortunately. But it looks really frightening. And the frightening does not come from how high. It comes from how noisy, how precipitous the fall, how unsafe it feels. I remember going to Coney Island in New York City, out near Brighton Beach, and I rode on the Mouse, the large white, old, rickety roller coaster there at night. And there were no lights on it. It was not lit up. So you get into the car and it takes you slowly up and you hear the and it's so loud, and the entire thing is made out of wood. And it is one of the most unnerving experiences I've ever had, because then you're dropped into pure blackness. And this isn't like Disney's Space Mountain. This is real darkness. And the sound is terrifying. It was a great ride. But what is an amusement park? Please don't tell me it's about fun. It's about death, really. And if you look at it that way, it all changes, and it all becomes, for me, very meaningful. But then again, I like horror films too. There are a lot of people who don't want to face death. And sometimes in the amusement park, death and beauty are intertwined, as in this extremely large Ferris wheel, which is not only very big, very slow moving, but it's sitting essentially on a steep incline over the entire city. So you've got not only the height of the Ferris wheel below you, but the entire city below you. Another 1,000 feet, 300 meters down below you. Fascinating. Just to multiply those effects. I have not been on this yet. I'm waiting to. I really want to go in the evening when it's starting to get dark. But I didn't do it this time. But I really love watching this thing. This slow. I can see it from down below on Rustaveli Boulevard. I look up and I look just to see, is it moving today? Because sometimes during the middle of the crisis, it wasn't moving. But sometimes it was, and no one was on it. And I think the city just paid for, or the state rather, probably paid for the electricity to stay on, because it's really colorful at night, and it glows different colors. But it is also, I mean, maybe you've never thought of a Ferris wheel as a symbol of death. I have, and I'll tell you why. When I was young, I picked up my fear of heights from a Ferris wheel. And the reason I did was because I was about 7, 8 years old, just moved to California. I was with some friends, and my mother took us to this traveling carnival that was in the parking lot of a shopping center. And there was a small, compared to this, almost not tall at all, Ferris wheel that was open. It was just a small, it was probably about 2-3 stories tall. Not very tall as far as Ferris wheels go. And we went up. And when you're on them, to get someone at the bottom off, they would stop it, let the person get off, put someone else on, and move. Which would mean the people at the top were left just kind of sitting there. Unlike this machine, which moves slow enough that anybody can get on it, and they never stop it. And I got stuck up there. I was with 2 of my young childhood friends, and they were sitting on either side of me, and I was in the middle. And I don't know if I'd ever been on a Ferris wheel before. It was certainly one of the first times I ever had. But what happened was, I wanted to go up there. I enjoyed it. I didn't have a fear of heights on the way up. We got stuck, and they said, "Ooh, let's rock it." And they rocked it back and forth and back and forth. And I looked straight down as they were rocking, could see the ground below me, and I was so afraid I was going to fall. And they were, of course, laughing. And at that point, I picked up a fear of heights. Interestingly enough, though, I lost my fear of heights on a Ferris wheel as well. There was a Ferris wheel that was 3 times the size of the one I gained my fear of heights on. It came to the town of Petaluma where I was staying. And this was during the Jesus People times, but we would have fun. We weren't all just, raving Christian hippies. And I told my friend Kenny, I said, okay, look, I want to get over there. I was about 21, 20. No, I was, what was I? About 20. And I said, look, I want you to take me out. This was one that had 2 wheels and a huge axis in the middle. So the axis spun, each of the wheels spun, and so did each of the cars spin. and they spun in such a way that they completely, you could turn them all the way over. So it was like 1, 2, 3 different ways you could spin over and over, and you go upside down, and they were in total metal cages. And I said to him, look, I want to get over my fear of heights. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to go with me. I know you have no fear of this thing at all. And I said, I just want you to spin it. And no matter what I say to you, do not stop spinning it. It's just like, I'm going to get really afraid, but don't worry about it. I'm trusting you now and such. And so he spun it and spun it out. I just went nuts at first. And then I noticed something that I never got over, and I always see this now, even though I will occasionally get a twinge of vertigo here and there. And what I noticed was that there's a point at which fear, pushed past a certain level, shades in one direction into awe and reverence. And that's what I felt. I felt this elation past the point of fear. And to me, that was the answer to the question of how to get over this fear of heights, was to push it past. Later, I went on to a very big one in Coney Island called The Wonder Wheel. Woody Allen has a movie with the same title. Similar as this, but much older style, more rickety, open to the world. This looks like it has glass and such. This is more like the London Eye, probably made by the same like Belgian or Netherlands company that makes these things so well. But I went up with some friends, and they were both petrified. And I realized, because they're holding it in. They're not afraid. There's a reason you scream on roller coasters, and a reason, like, here's the interesting thing. On a really good roller coaster, even the guys have to scream. It's great. It's because you have to break it down. You have to get the person to the point where they're willing to, in a sense, let go. But my friends just held on to their fear as we went around, and it took it up. And that Wonder Wheel in Coney Island doesn't shake any more than this, although I must say it's a rickety, well, it does do some weird stuff, but it's a rickety machine. And it just generates a bit of fear. And I think that the best way to get over these kinds of things, I think that's what amusement parks are here for. They're a challenge. They're a host, a cluster of symbols, often around death, often around nostalgia, often around laughter, often around screaming. Something to think about. What really are we doing to ourselves when we go to an amusement park? Of course, what Disney has done is tried to clean the whole experience up. So they've tried to take out the bad noises. And even, their Haunted House, their Space Mountain, other roller coaster rides, they're fun, but they've taken out the part that makes it the most important. And I think this is a pretty amazing Ferris wheel. I don't know what the name of it is, though. I have to ask someone someday. Some Georgian can tell me, because they all have names. It's London Eye, the Wonder Wheel, things like that. So we're going to think about walking down the mountainside now for the second part of our journey into reality. This part of the journey, in a way, it's what's interesting is that we are looking at two very separate aspects of reality, and yet, as you'll see, I think they're all connected. And one part is that which we make, what we do to each other, how people congregate in places like this, to take rides, to speak something to themselves. They want the elation. Some people know. You push it past fear, past the screaming, past the laughter, and you get something out of this. Other people can never get over it. And truthfully, some of these devices we've invented are ingenious. That whole imitation falling machine, I've seen people, in some places they go up and down and up and down and up and down. I've been on one that was like that. This was a rather flimsy version of it. However, what makes this one different is the way they just hold you up there without. It's kind of like, go for lunch and come back and we'll drop you later. You don't know when it's going out from under you. But what we're going to do now is walk through a more natural world. The side of the mountain. It's not a park. Well, maybe it's part of a park. They've recently refurbished the trails. But as we go through, we'll see some people just kind of relaxing on the sides of the near the Ferris wheel. And from here, again, we'll see the view that goes down. There's the big television tower that goes down. Look how far the city is below you. And I'd love to be up here at night. It's kind of a cool idea. Putting an amusement park on top of 1,000 feet, literally hanging over the city. And there's a one way to get up here that's really great. It's the funicular rail, which I didn't take because I enjoy spending 15 cents to go down the hill. So, let's go ahead and go. So one thing that I am struck by, I could say I'm struck by the shadows on the city, and I am. But what I'm really struck by is the angle of the light creating those shadows. And when we explore reality, the light is changing all of the time. And that has an effect on everything. Plants will move in accordance to the way light moves. People will act one way in the morning, another way at night, because of the amount or angle of the light. And as I've been taking these walks, particularly going down the hill, down the mountain, I am struck always by the light of the moment. I'm about to pass a couple people on the trail. But that effect is not simply an effect of light. What do I mean? Well, for one thing, it's amazing how little people think about light. It's the thing they need to live. All day, every day. As long as they're awake, they need light. We also need the sun. Although, too much sun is not good for you either. During the course of the day, we are presented with several different periods of light, which change depending on the latitude you're in. But basically, it's pre-dawn light, morning light, midday light, evening light, and what's called the golden hour in photography, when the sun goes down and it's still light. And in places like Alaska, where I've lived, sometimes that can go on for hours. Same with the pre-dawn light. In fact, where I lived in Haines, Alaska, sometimes you would see the sun going down and coming up, depending on which mountain range or valley you were looking at the same time, around 2 o'clock in the morning. Now, this just isn't a biological effect. though it certainly has lots of biological implications. There's lots of questions to be asked. Why do people want tans? It's a very strange thing. Interestingly enough, the sun is extremely dangerous. And the worst time of day to be out on a hot day is between, say, 12 and 5. Basically the afternoon. And that's how I deal with it here in Tbilisi, because it gets very hot. It was very hot today. But Georgians tend to stay up later. Why do they tend to stay up later? Because they start getting active as the sun's angles start to change. And so at the Mtatsminda amusement park, people were in a kind of a reverie. It's hard to explain. Part of it was just sitting on the edge of the city, looking down. I had heard Georgian girls singing. There was a woman in what seemed to be a full niqab or burqa. At the moment, I'm trying to remember which is which. I think it was more of a niqab. But she was singing underneath it to her husband, who was just dressed in jeans and a short. A very Arabic kind of tune. There's something about the moment that seems to call forth something. Now, I also believe that our eyes are made for sunlight. Now, this probably sounds like something that doesn't require a genius to say. But it kind of does, because we've forgotten that. What do I mean? Think of how often you are living in an environment where the light remains the same all day. When I lived in New York City, especially during the winter, I could go to work, and I did before the sun came up. I would only have a half hour or an hour for lunch. I think it was a half hour. This is America. This is New York. You don't get a full hour. Have a half hour for lunch. And then I would come back, work, and go home when the sun was already down. So my whole day was spent under fluorescent lights, which are the worst lights for you. To understand fluorescent lights, they're either usually blue or green pumped up to white. Blue and green pumped up to white do not make you healthy. If you've ever been in a bathroom and looked in the mirror and seen all sorts of blood vessels that were broken and such, well, that's blue and green light also. Changing the way you look. It will make the red look black. Actually, the least healthy light, to my understanding, is red light pumped up to white. We almost never see that because there have been tests that show that can cause cancer. The light we most prefer is yellow-green spectrum pumped up to the light. But here's the point. In nature, in the sun, all day long, the sun is changing colors. That is why the angles make everything appear different. Right now, as I'm looking over the city, there is a blue tint to it. And that blue tint is essentially going to eventually dive into an ultraviolet tint and then into dark. And that means that is what we need to live. We, humans, have created the idea, yes, we've created light. We have electric light. Well, great. But what we've discovered is that with enough time spent in one kind of light, it starts to affect your eyes. And I definitely felt that when I lived in New York City, working under what to me was an embankment of fluorescent lights in this one very large store. It was just like every other slot in the ceiling was a fluorescent light. And it glowed, made all the plastic on the record covers glow. And my eyes started to get weak for the first time under that environment. That's where I first started thinking about the nature of light, which we spend no time. So to me, my morning in the house is very different than my afternoon in the house, is very different than my evening in the house, is very different than my night. I turn on different lights depending on the season, but I would never just simply leave the same light on all day. I have different kinds of light bulbs. I think about these things. It's not just a little thing. This is light. We need light. And we don't understand light. We live in an unreal world when it comes to the meaning of light. So that's one thing that I think as I see the sun setting here and the rays getting longer and the shadows growing. But there's more to it than that. So one of the things I've learned is that we don't really see things because we don't understand light. And I'm talking about people who have quite a bit of scientific training, who can break down all of the physical and wave elements of light. And yet, they see pretty much like everyone else. All of this knowledge tells you very little about the world around you. And yet, without that knowledge, you do not understand what you see. And the knowledge I mean is the knowledge of the world, which should be being passed to you from the time you are a child by your parents. But what does it mean when a child is left alone with the television set? Or with a screen showing a video over and over and over again? Baby shark. What does it mean when the child absorbs this 100 times because you're showing this to the child? What does it mean about what the child is actually seeing? Can the child comprehend the natural world anymore? Is the child's sense of vision being distorted by the rays coming from these machines? Now, obviously, I don't think these machines are evil, but nor do I think they are neutral. Many people will say, well, technology is good, it all depends on how you use it. And as Jacques Ellul used to say, oh, you are so naive. The machines, technology, systems, none of it is neutral. It all moves us towards other technological ends. And if technology, if these are the only plants that you are seeing, and this is the only bird life you are hearing, then you do not know nature. You need to get out and look at things, because there is more here than you've been told. And I'm not sounding mystical here, although I do feel there is something in nature which prompts a kind of mysticism, but I don't think that's the right response to it. I think the right response is to try to understand what you are seeing. And to do that, you have to spend time looking. Now, Rookmacher said, you see what you know. Well, one way to change what you know is to go to some place you haven't been before. And as he describes looking at paintings, he says we think the act of seeing is just simple. This is why people will scroll through photos on a phone, show them to you, and think they've shown you the photos. They haven't. They've only scrolled through this strange device. And it's not that meaningful an experience. It is less than paper thin. This is why I think the films of Andrei Tarkovsky are so important. Tarkovsky is the opposite of a psychedelic experience. The psychedelic experience wants to stop time, wants to put you, quote unquote, inside the moment. What Tarkovsky wants to do is bring you alongside the moment, help you to see how it is passing. These shapes, these patterns in nature, which we have trouble understanding because we don't understand light, are whispering something to us. They are like nutrition in a way. We need whatever it is they are doing. Interestingly enough, in nature, you have two things at once. You have a totality, a forest, a beach, a desert, mountains, and you have extreme individuality. Each little seed pod is different from the other. In a sense, each one is living a different story, but we can't understand it because it is too immense for us. And I lost it because I went the wrong way. I was just looking for I was just looking at these images were so good, and I was looking, and suddenly I turned and the light was totally different and they didn't look the same. And so in a way, we are connected to the things we see. It isn't that we create the image, but rather it's that our focal point discovers the image. The image is there. No one can see this flower the way I am seeing it now, ever. Because it all depends on the angle of light. It depends on the viewer and my experience. I have seen these flowers before, but I don't know what they're called. It's an interesting plant. It almost seems like something in the, I don't know, seems almost like a conifer. It's got these needles. And yet, they have seed pods, like green beans. What is it? I don't know. Nevertheless, I am prompted to ask what these things are and to look. And that prompting is everywhere. It's almost like they're just questions left hanging. What is this tree? And I think when God said to Adam in Genesis to name everything, he didn't mean to give it a silly little name. Oh, this plant is Uncle Toby, and that plant is Larissa, which would be just absurd. Rather, that the name would correspond with the thing. And of course, every culture gives different names to different things, because These things have many meanings. They are symbolic meanings, they're epistemological meanings, they're ontological meanings. They are meanings, but here's the point. They live apart from us. And yet we're all connected on this world. And there are things we have never run into, animal species we have yet to meet. And when we do, those things will be meaningful to us. And then there's another question. And that question is, what happens if I don't get down the mountain before the sun sets? Well, fortunately, I know pretty much exactly where I am. But that brings on a whole different aspect. And that is our relationship to the dark. And we do have one. Half our lives are spent in darkness. And we have many stories about the dark. And some people will say, well, we do get superstitious. Well, we do. But I have been in the woods in Alaska on a day without a moon. And I can tell you, quite, what can I say, spooky? Yeah, absolutely. Haunting? Yeah. Is it me imagining things? I don't think so. I don't think it's me saying, ooh, I'm afraid. I think there's something in the dark. And that thing in the dark is both it's a tangible thing. It's a real thing. The darkness has, as Kirk Douglas so eloquently put it in the movie The Bad and the Beautiful, the darkness has a life of its own. So do shadows. So do lights burning at night. And that's another thing we've killed. We have tried very hard to kill the darkness because it so unnerves us. So we have tried to make everything, particularly, in the more advanced countries, we've tried to make everything safe, to put night lights everywhere, to stop people from those dark shadows. One of the things I like about Georgia is that there are dark buildings, and they're safe. People don't get mugged and raped behind buildings here. I have a friend who walks 2 o'clock in the morning. She's walking around to save a few lari to get home. She thinks nothing of the dark. Interestingly enough, there are baboon hunters down in Africa. And they hunt the baboon for meat in this one very primitive tribe. And they like the dark. And they say the full moon is bad because then the baboons can see you coming, and which is interesting because it makes you the creature of the dark. And I think in many ways, people are the creature of the dark. We are both light and dark. But fortunately, the light is still with us as we're making our way down and down and down. And there are different ways down the hill. I could spend a long time just talking about trails and directions and such like that, but that's a different discussion. But basically, see, there are many people who say, well, yes, you know, we get these symbolic images from nature, or we have this symbolic resonance. But I would say it goes far beyond that. Who we are as spiritual beings is completely related to the things in our environment. And sometimes what we need to do, as I did last week, I'm not doing it today, obviously, is we need to simply go for a walk. Not to get anywhere, except maybe home eventually, but simply to see things. And I don't simply mean a walk in the park, but if that's all you've got, you can take that. But I mean also just a walk to see things. Take a walk like Tarkovsky made films, exploring the landscape. And this can be done on a city street in many ways, a very different kind of experience, but equally as valid as it can be done on a trail like this one. And this trail is, what's interesting about Tbilisi is the city is there, and up there's the television tower, and the amusement park is up there. But beyond that, you can just go on and on and on. Very few big cities right next to rather endless, open, not wilderness, I wouldn't call it, but nature. It's certainly not as wild as it would be in Alaska, although the Caucasus Mountains, which are that way, are certainly very wild places. And I look forward to taking a trip up to them this coming week. But anyway, I don't want to just ramble on here. I wanted to thank you for coming with me on my little journey just to explore things. And I wanted to show you that everything you see can open up into questions. And those are questions for you to ask. And then to compare notes with other people to see if you saw what was there, or if they saw what was there, or if you both saw it, or neither of you saw it because you heard from someone else. Do you realize you just passed this thing when you were there? You know, you didn't see it at all. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes we don't see things at all. But I want to encourage you to start looking at the world differently. So this is Byrne in Tbilisi, Georgia. Not doing Georgian Crossroads, although this is pretty much like Georgian Crossroads, and I suggest you go over there and check out some of my other videos, but in a very different mood. I'm asking you to ask questions, to go into nature and have the courage to ask what it is you're looking for. So, this is the Anadromous saying, swim against the stream, or in this case, walk against gravity. We'll see each other later.
A people without history is not redeemed from time. For history is a pattern of timeless moments.